Oh, there we are.
Yeah,
We're live.
looks like we're live. All right.
We made it.
First presenters of the day. This is exciting.
All right. So, forgive my appearance. I got the COVID hair, the COVID facial hair. I look terrible, quite frankly. But yes, for people who might not know who we are, should probably introduce ourselves. I'm Kyle Byrd. I'm one half of the Kaiju Transmissions podcast. And who are you again?
I'm Kevin Derendorf, and counterintuitively, I'm not a part of the Kaiju Transmissions podcast most of the time. But
not officially, right?
Yeah, I have a blog called Mazer Patrol, and I wrote a book called Kaiju for Hipsters.
And what are we talking about today, Kevin?
We're here to talk about a movie called The Great Yokai War, which came out in 2005, and that makes it the 15th anniversary. So, I think it's a good time to reevaluate it.
I couldn't agree more. So I guess people can see our slideshow here, and we'll go through those, and we'll have our talking points. And if time permits, I guess people can ask us questions, unless I'm getting something wrong there.
We've got a set of comments here. So yes, okay. Indeed, we do have faces. Yeah, we'll go through. I'll kind of try to keep an eye on stuff as it comes in. I might not be able to. So if anything gets ignored, just repeat it over and over and over in the chat until we respond to it. That's the good way to get attention.
Yeah.
Anyway, let's get this panel started. So I think if we were in a live room, I would ask for a show of hands for how many people know what yokai are to begin with. I don't think that we can necessarily do that because it's YouTube and people could be watching it after the fact, and I can't really see everybody's hands, unfortunately, through the internet. So we're just going to go through a quick rundown of some of the background information for this movie, because it's got a lot of cultural context. So obviously, Great Yokai War, it focuses on yokai, and yokai are Japanese apparitions or spirits. The closest Western equivalent I could think of are fairies, but there's a wide range of really weird yokai, and it's sort of because throughout Japanese mythology, you have all kinds of different situations where you have maybe somebody says, don't go on the mountain or the snow woman will get you, or don't go in the river or the kappa will get you. And then when Japan was, unified in the 1600s, everybody started talking to each other about their various legends. And you sort of got this kind of big roster of all these weird different creatures from all over. And they sort of started hanging out in prints and stories. And you get like parades of a whole bunch of yokai coming together.
So, like you said, they're folk creatures, so you could compare them to, like you said, fairies, or also trolls gets used a lot. Now that was really kind of turned into a pop culture thing with a manga guy, artist and writer named Shigeru Mizuki. And he's most associated with the popularization of these creatures showing up in pop culture. Just to give you a little bit of background on who he is, he was drafted into the Imperial Army in World War II, where he saw combat. He lost his arm, and he saw a lot of his friends get killed, typical horror of war kind of story. His brother was, after the war, was taken as a POW by the American occupation. But when he lost his arm, that was a very spiritual, I guess, incident for him. It informed a lot of his work. In being yokai centric, he so that's another awesome thing about him, is that his career is a a manga artist. You know, he was doing all this with one arm, you know, and in the slide here, you can see some of the things he's done. Kevin, what's that on the right above his photo there?
So that's the original Kamishibai of Graveyard Kitaro. So you took that character that's this sort of one-eyed boy that was born in a cemetery that was popular from a series of paper plays, and he sort of reinvented him as the character that you see right in the top corner next to Godzilla there. And you basically don't see the original version of that character anymore because the Mizuki version is way more popular now.
I would guess a lot of people who might be checking this out have seen the character maybe, and even if they don't know what it is. So his Kitaro comic strip, you know, that was something that really blew up and led to there was this yokai boom in the 60s. And it's still a classic property today. I mean, every 10 to 15 years, it gets a new anime series. There's live action movies, all kinds of things. So the Great Yokai War, or Yokai Daisenso, is one of the classic story arcs from that manga. And just to kind of give you a little idea about that storyline, it was published in 1966, and so you had Kitaro and his usual friends of the Japanese yokai, which you can see in some of the slides here, and also the previous one on that little picture he drew of them in front of Godzilla, which was just a little fun thing. I don't think they had like an official crossover or anything like that, but there was a storyline where they battled Western monsters. So that included a Wolfman, a Frankenstein monster, a vampire, like a Dracula type vampire, and a witch. And that story itself was loosely based on a folktale called Momotaro. That was about a boy who leads his animal friends to liberate the island of Higashima from invading demons. And that story itself was repeated a lot during World War II as a propaganda tool. So the Kitaro manga storyline, it starts with a child who is wearing a Vietnamese leaf hat. He asks the Japanese yokai to help defend his land from invading Western monsters. And the story has a lot of references to different wars: the Pacific War, the Battle of Okinawa, the Vietnam War, the Korean War, the Bikini Atoll H-bomb tests. And, you know, some of those references include, you know, villagers hiding in tombs that would reflect the caves that were used in warfare, and in both, actually, the Battle of Okinawa and the Vietnam War. There's even a point where the Western monsters try to trick Kitaro into demilitarization. They say, we don't want to fight a pointless war like Vietnam. You know, that was an intentional allusion to the conclusion of the Korean War. Both the original manga and the movie we're about to talk to actually end with the villains being destroyed in what looks like an atomic bomb explosion. The 2005 movie that we're talking about today actually adds a little coda where Mizuki has a cameo himself, and someone says, you know, we won the war, and he says, who won? Don't be foolish. There's even a limit to foolishness. Wars must not happen. They only make you hungry. The point being that even though the good guys won, it was still a war. It was still hell, and war is just not good. And Mizuki, I think, had a lot of complicated feelings about war in the United States. You know, he was very anti-war, but he also harbored, as we see in the metaphor in the original storyline, he had some resentments towards the American occupation after the war. But as a war survivor from World War II, he also harbored resentment towards the Japanese for, the atrocities that they did during World War II. So he had a lot of complex feelings. Was a complicated guy. Now, so that's the original storyline. Now I'll let Kevin take it away here with some information on some of the other adaptations that we've seen, in cartoons and such over the years.
Yeah, so I mean, as much as the Great Yokai War is kind of a classic story in the original Kitaro manga, you can sort of see on top of as Byrd mentioned, the Momotaro roots, you can see that it came out a year after Monster Zero. And for those who don't know, the Japanese title for Monster Zero is Kaiju Daisenso, and the storyline in Kitaro is called Yokai Daisenso, which is only a 20% different title. So that's kind of, if you think about, this is the Earth monsters fighting off this foreign space monster versus this is about the Japanese monsters fighting off these Western monsters that are coming in. There's a little bit of thematic overlap that's going on there as well. So the Great Yokai War is a very influential story. It actually introduced one of Kitaro's frequent companions, which is this guy here that is a sort of a roll of paper who or a roll of cloth, and he is one of the characters that is most associated with Kitaro and actually shows up in the movie that we're going to talk about later. This story has been adapted into anime at least 4 times now, and features, the big king of the Western yokai is this monster Backbeard, who's just a floating eyeball. But then we got another adaptation of sorts a little bit down the road, and this is the Yokai Monsters trilogy. So because Kitaro was super successful, we got this boom of yokai material in Japan, where it was really popular in boys' magazines and things to just go off about yokai-related stories, and here are the different monsters, and so on and so forth. A lot kind of coming off of the wave of kaiju popularity. And in fact, the Yokai trilogy was a period film trilogy made by Daiei that directly rolled off of the back of the Daimajin trilogy. So they made 3 Daimajin movies, and then they sort of segued into making these yokai movies that were also, samurai films with monsters in them. So it's all kind of part of the same series. And they did 3 stories, 3 movies in the course of 2 years. And those are available in the US from ADV if you want to track down long out of print DVDs. But 2 of those stories are kind of generic yokai related stories. And then the middle one in this trilogy is Spook Warfare, which is about all of Japan's yokai gathering together to fight off a vampire that's come from the Middle East and is trying to take over Japan. So they don't quite go with the same monsters that were in the Mizuki version, but it's very much influenced by that. The Yokai Monsters trilogy is fantastic. I would recommend checking them out if you're a fan of Daiei special effects. These were right together with the Gamera movies. 2 of them were on double bill with the Gamera movies. Spook Warfare was not. It was actually on double bill with another Yuasa movie, the Snake Girl and the Silver-Haired Witch. But it's one of those classic things that you still see merchandise for today, especially Spook Warfare. And they had tried to reboot it actually in the 1980s. That didn't quite work, but basically the pitch that Makoto Tezuka had there was basically reused for a series called the Yokai Tengoku, or Monster Heaven. So he made 2 movies in 1980 something and 1990 something, and kind of kept that legacy going. So the history with Daiei is really complicated for anybody who's looked into the history of the Gamera franchise. Basically, they went bankrupt in the 1970s, but they were revived under Tokuma, which was a publishing house. And under Tokuma, they had a lot they slowly built themselves up through the video market, and then had a bit of a renaissance in the 1990s with stuff like the Gamera trilogy and Shall We Dance, but they never quite were operating at a full profit. You know, the Gamera movies are great, but they did not make a whole lot of money. So because of that, when Yasuyoshi Tokuma passed away in 2000, his company was kind of eager to get rid of Daiei, so they moved it off to Kadokawa, and Kadokawa, upon doing all of the work to integrate it, announced their own film division. So they started making movies right away under this new Kadokawa Daiei studio. And the first of these was directed by Takashi Miike, who was most known at the time for sort of cheap direct-to-video movies that were very popular. So his movie that he did with them was called One Missed Call, but he'll show up again in this video, so to speak. And the other thing is, once Kadokawa Daiei was kind of established, they got really remake happy. They sort of were going through their back catalog and finding titles that were successful in the past, and especially in the 70s and 80s, and being like, hey, let's bring back Samurai Reincarnation. Let's bring back the Inugami Clan. Let's bring back The Girl Who Leapt Through Time. And they were just making remakes left and right. And in that line, we get to the subject of this panel, which is the Great Yokai War. So we have a whole bunch of talent that was brought together for this movie. We have director Takashi Miike, who is one of the best recognized Japanese directors in the West, I think. He's done over 100 movies, and he usually does a lot of movies per year. Prior to this, he would do 9 movies in a year, but he really was able to take his time with the Great Yokai War and put in a lot of effort, and he had a much bigger budget than he was used to working with. In addition to Miike, there were 2 other screenwriters for the project. Mitsuhiko Sawamura is kind of known for the dot hack franchise. If anybody remembers the 2000s anime that was kind of related to the Matrix. He also, after this, went on to write one of the live action Gegege no Kitaro movies. So we'll get to that later. Tsuyohiko Idakura, I don't really know any other titles from. So, but then there was a whole host of great consultants that formed something that they call the production team Kai. And this included Shigeru Mizuki, who we talked about before, and then Hiroshi Aramata, who wrote the Tales of the Capital, or Teito Monogatari series. We'll get to that in a little bit. Natsuhiko Kyogoku, who is a yokai researcher and also sort of oversees a society for mystery writers in Japan. And then Miyuki Miyabe, who wrote, Crossfire and Iko and Kojin and probably some other big titles that Brave Story, that's one of hers. So this was sort of a dream team of consultants that were brought together. And on top of that, we got a bunch of cool creature designers, and we'll get to them in sort of a separate segment when we talk about the character designs. Lastly, Koji Endo has done scores for most of, a whole lot of Takashi Miike's movies, so they were a good collaboration team.
So a little more on the production history. This was made for Kadokawa's 60th anniversary, and the idea was to bring back all their old franchises, including the tokusatsu stuff, which got us this and Gamera the Brave. It began as a discussion with Miyuki Miyabe about the idea of remaking the 1968 movie, and that's where Team Kai came in with Aramata, Mizuki, Kyogoku, and they all kind of came together with ideas. Aramato was the one that brought Miike in as the director, and he would also be working on the novel form of the movie at the same time as the actual movie was being made. So kind of like a Michael Crichton Jurassic Park kind of deal. So it does work in a way as a sequel to his Tokyo, The Last Megalopolis. We'll unpack that in just a moment. But the filming ran from July 13th, 2004, which is we are like we're 2 days away from that anniversary, and it wrapped on January 16th, 2005. Came out in August of that year. The production cost was around 1.3 billion yen, which in US dollars is about 12 million. And that was the most expensive movie for the studio at that time, which should also give you an idea of just how Japanese movie budgets differ from ours. And so we're going to go now, I guess, to a breakdown of the cast. And I apologize in advance for butchering some of these names. But the lead character of Tadashi we have is Ryonosuke Kamiki, who is still a popular actor today. He's almost 30 now, in case anyone out there needed a reason to feel old and go through a existential crisis. So he's kind of the child actor that kind of stuck with it, kind of like, how someone like DiCaprio would here. And then I'm not going to go through everybody, but just some of the more recognizable faces to people that might be checking this out. Sadao Abe, he's I believe he's mostly a stage guy. Is that right, Kevin? He does a lot of stage stuff, I know.
I believe so.
But yeah, he plays the Kappa here. And as you can see in some of these pictures, I know they're small, but you can see some of the really good practical makeup effects on some of these actors. The prolific Bunta Sagawara plays Tadashi's grandpa. People familiar with Japanese cinema probably know him best from all of those Fukusaku gangster movies. And then we have Akira Imoto, has a little cameo at the beginning. People checking us out now would probably know him from he's Yuki in Godzilla vs. Space Godzilla, and he's also in Shin Godzilla. Shiro Sano at the far right there, he has a cameo as this reporter character's boss. And then I don't know if I know Kanji Tsuda here in a cameo. Kevin, why would I know him?
He is one of those actors that just keeps showing up in thing after thing after thing. The main thing that I can think of that people might latch onto is he's the main villain in the third season of Garo. But okay. He's one of those, once you start looking at cast lists, he's a character actor that pops up quite a bit. And he actually plays two roles in this movie because he plays Tadashi's father and the grown-up version of Tadashi.
Ah, okay. And he's okay. Is he in Gamera the Brave as well?
Yes, he is.
Yeah, he's the dad in that too. Okay, and then we have some more cast members here. There's Shigeru Mizuki in the top right in that cameo as what do they call him? He's like the god
Grand Elder.
The Grand Elder, and that's when he gives the little anti-war coda. We have Kenichi Endo at the bottom left. There is the giant Tengu, and then playing Kato we have Atsushi Toyokawa, and then of course as his sidekick is Agi, the evil yokai, played by Chiaki Kuriyama, who I think most people would know as Go-Go and Kill Bill, but she's also in a whole bunch of stuff. She's in Battle Royale. So speaking of Kato and this villain that comes from this novel written by Aramata, that is a whole other dense can of worms that I am not properly qualified to talk about. So I will hand that to Kevin here.
Sure. So I think a lot of people didn't recognize Kato in this movie, who are less familiar with Japanese literature or pop culture, because he doesn't have his iconic hat. But
Right.
he's this character that is an ancient onmyoji or wizard, basically, and he's been the villain from the series Teito Monogatari, or Tales of the Capital. That was adapted several times, but I think the ones that most people would know, we have the Tokyo, The Last Megalopolis, and its sequel, Tokyo: The Last War, that Toho put out, in which he was played by Kyusaku Shimada. And then we have an anime adaptation called Doomed Megalopolis, which was one of those 90s OVAs that got a lot of play in the States for being, graphic and weird. These are very dense movies, so I don't know if I would necessarily recommend them to people who don't want to spend some time on Wikipedia looking up, Meiji era pop culture. But
right, it's like it's very culturally specific and dense. So you need to have an actual knowledge of like the history during that time period. It would be like, imagine a Japanese person reading The Watchmen with no knowledge of what the 1980s in the United States was like. Like, you would be probably pretty lost. I watched the first movie that was made by Akio Josoji, and I didn't understand it at all.
Yeah, there's a lot of, oh, here's something about Taira no Masakato. Oh, here's something about the Great Kanto earthquake. Oh, here's something about the various decorations on the street in Osaka. Like, it doesn't stop. So it's rewarding if you really go through it. The best analogy, something like Watchmen or League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, where like if you know all of the references, you can really get into it. But it is a little bit like you're pulling pieces together from various things and kind of seeing the connections that Aramata is making with it. Nevertheless, this series was really popular in Japan and inspired things like the Onmyoji movies, but also to a lesser extent, a less obvious extent, you get things like Clamp had a series called X, and one called Tokyo Babylon, where you have characters that are very similar to this, that do these kind of magical things in an urban fantasy setting. And then the character directly kind of influenced a bunch of copycats. So there's one that's a warden in Rikio, the story of Riki, in Shin Megami Tensei, the series that eventually like spun off into Persona, Nura, Rise of the Yokai Clan. And then what everybody brings up when they see this guy for the first time is like, oh, hey, is that M. Bison? And
yes.
So yeah, this is a guy that's very popular in the culture that you see as a recurring villain in a lot of places. And there are movies that were made with this character that have not been localized or even fan subbed. That they're not all great, but he's got a bigger footprint than one would necessarily recognize.
Yeah, and that shouldn't let anyone who might not have seen Great Yokai War, don't let that deter you, because it's perfectly accessible without it. He's just a big pop culture character in Japan. It would be like, you can watch. It would be like watching like Suicide Squad without knowing who the Joker is.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, people react to him when he's mentioned by name in the movie, and that's why, basically.
And here we have some other key yokai that are not played by human beings. Of course, on the left here is everybody's favorite, Sune Kosari. Isn't he adorable? A lot of people, I've seen people get adamantly turned off by this movie just because of how much physical abuse this thing takes. He gets beaten to a pulp several times, transformed into a horrible monster. He bleeds what looks like gravy. But he is the yokai that nudges your shin. And then we have the loincloth yokai, Iten Momen, who they ride around on to get from place to place. We have Karakasa, who is probably one of the more recognizable ones in the West. I know. I think they have him in is it Yokai Watch, which is popular with the youngsters these days. But yeah, the one-eyed umbrella yokai, and then we have the Kirin, who is at the right, and that the movie is framed around the Kirin Rider, which is kind of the film's version of your Joseph Campbell hero story guy, your Luke Skywalker or your Neo from the Matrix, the chosen one. So speaking of the Kirin Rider and what the movie is all about, Kevin, would you mind giving us a synopsis of the film?
Yeah, it's for a movie that's over 2 hours long. The plot is not as complicated as one would necessarily expect, but if you watch it, there's definitely some nuance and subtlety that gets brought into it. But basically, you have this kid Tadashi who is living out in the countryside with his grandfather and aunt because his parents are busy with work basically, and they don't come to visit him. And he goes to a folk festival where they are basically choosing somebody to become the Kirin Rider, which is a title that's passed down from one person to another. That basically the idea is that the Kirin Rider will prevent some great disaster. So he gets really invested in this because I guess he's kind of a lonely kid, and he goes to a mountain where the Kirin Rider supposedly has stored a sword or something along those lines. He sees a bunch of yokai there, so he sees a bunch of spirits, and then he gets really interested in the whole prospect. So he befriends the Sunekosuri, the little cat-like creature. They say it's cat-like. It doesn't quite look that way to me, but I'm not an expert on feline anatomy. And he goes and he does some research at the Shigeru Mizuki Museum, actually, which was some nice product placement, cross promotional type of stuff. He meets a reporter who works for Kai magazine, which, is, you remember, was the same magazine that this movie was first proposed in, who's also investigating yokai. And eventually he kind of stumbles across this group of yokai that are banding together. And the reason why they're banding together is that one of their own, this fairy creature called Agi, has turned against them and joined the forces of Yasunori Kato, who is collecting yokai and sort of using their spiritual energy to create monsters called Yomo Tsumono. And the idea is that they take the yokai's natural energy and the sort of grudge that's left over from a discarded object. So they'll put a yokai and a thrown out bicycle together into a machine, and then it comes out as a bicycle monster. So basically, Tadashi and a group of the handful of yokai that are willing to rebel sort of get together to try to go up against Kato. And Kato creates this big monster thing, flies to Tokyo, and lands on the Capitol building. most of the adults in the world can't see the yokai, so it's not clear how much panic is going on. Although we do see, some people reacting to the monsters as they're appearing in the city, and basically the heroes trick all of the yokai from across Japan, and in some cases even from beyond Japan, to come together and converge on Tokyo, and you get this massive group of thousands of yokai all heading together to Tokyo, thinking that there's going to be a party, basically. But in fact, it winds up being a big fight between them and these mechanical monsters. And don't want to give away the ending, but it's an unconventional defeat for our main villain, to say the least.
Yes.
So like I said, there's a whole lot of themes that, if you want to, kind of unpack the pieces, this is a children's movie, but Miike is a bit of a maverick director.
It's pretty densely, thematically, it's pretty densely layered for, what's essentially a kid's fantasy that grew out of, them wanting to have something to compare to like Harry Potter or something. Like, there's a whole lot of layers to it.
So the core conflict has changed from the original story, where it's not so much this Western influence, but it's more of an industrial influence. And you can see that in the, Kado has this big machine that he uses to convert all of the yokai. And they come out as sort of twisted forms that are created by sort of the refuse of the Industrial Revolution. So, you get, a vacuum cleaner combined with a yokai, or lawnmower combined with a yokai, or something along those lines. And it's I was watching it with my fiance, and she kind of said like, oh, this reminds me of Tetsuo the Iron Man, which is not usually what you think of when you think of children's movies.
Yeah. And also I think there's probably something to be said about the big monster absorbing City Hall.
Oh yeah, for sure.
But yeah, so we're going to kind of bat back and forth on a lot of these themes. A big one is the concept of animism, which is big in Japan, but I think in a lot of cultures, there's kind of this idea, which essentially is the idea that everything, including inanimate objects, have a sort of a soul or an energy, or, even if you look at a movie like GMK, they play with that concept in there too, with the idea that these statues kind of hold this energy or this soul. So you see that a lot. That is why they are feeding off of the anger that these objects, these inanimate objects like bicycles and even shoes and stuff, have when they're thrown away. They're of no use, and so they're tossed away. And so they have this resentment, and when combined with the yokai's energy, it creates these mechanical monsters. So, and that's, like I said, that's a big thing in Japan. From what I understand, I've never been there. From what I understand, though, that's why you don't see a whole lot of thrift stores in Japan, at least to my knowledge. Again, I could be completely wrong, but that's the idea that I've been told. And then the other one is just adolescence. This is quite literally, the story of a boy becoming a young man. It's a coming of age story. And it's interesting. Miike on the DVD in the interview said that he felt that the actor playing Tadashi was going through the same thing, because he was only something like 11 or 12. And he said, in those 7 or so months that they shot, he could see him growing and maturing as a person, getting, that kind of, from that kind of puberty age. And Miike said that they filmed most of the movie in sequence, which is rare for any movie to be shot in sequence. and he said he could see that as they were filming as well, and you do get a lot of that in the movie itself. You get visual cues, you know, when he's first woken up after you know, I guess getting transferred to the yokai land, for lack of a better word. You know, his hand, there's a close-up of his hand on the water spirit princess's thigh, and you know, at the end you get a visual metaphor when he takes off his clothes and puts on the warrior clothes that the yokai give him, and it's, you know, he's not a boy anymore, he's a young man.
Yeah, I think you know, tying into that, you know, you get a little bit of the same stuff that goes on in All Monsters Attack, where you have the kid that's kind of like left to his own devices, and his family is more or less absentee, in the sense that, you know, this is a boy that, you know, early in the movie we get him calling his mom and saying like, hey, are you guys gonna visit? And they're like, maybe, and it makes him start to cry. But you know, he's very much has a strong connection with his grandfather, even though his grandfather has dementia and only like recognizes him one in 3 days. But you know, he also kind of has a bit of a found family in terms of, you know, getting together with all of these yokai, and then there's sort of a sad coda at the end that, you know, they're going to drift apart again as he grows up. But yeah, the sort of community spirit of, you know, bringing all the yokai together to fight against a common threat is something that runs through every incarnation of the Great Yokai War. There's also a bit of a legacy type of theme that goes on, both with Tadashi sort of being chosen to be the Kirin rider, and that's this lineage of people who have had this sword handed down to fight disaster time and time again, and you get flashbacks to the past. Also with there's a bit where this one yokai, Kawahime, is basically approached by Kado and being like, hey, don't you want to be part of the force that is going to overthrow the humans, because don't you bear a grudge against them? And she says, yes, I bear a grudge against them, but you know, that's not part of who I am and what I want to be, is somebody that goes out and seeks vengeance. So it's kind of like, what do you want your legacy to be in the world? Do you want something that is going to leave a path of love, or one that's going to sort of walk a path of destruction?
And also, that also ties into what we were saying earlier about getting older, and not to give the ending away. You know, a lot of people talk about what does it mean, and I mean, the ending is basically, you know, once you are old, you've grown cynical, you lose your imagination, you can't see a lot of the good things that you could see as a child. But yeah, obviously war is the other big one. We already talked about the coda at the end of war. Shouldn't happen, it only makes you hungry. Saying, you know, war is meaningless. And there were some conscious decisions on Miike's part to convey that. When the yokai all travel to the city for this big thing, they think it's a party, and they don't even know where they are. And Miike said that he intentionally showed that, you know, the yokai don't really know what they're doing. There's a whole bunch of miscommunication. They don't quite understand. And he said he wanted to show the fight as something that just shouldn't even exist, something completely stupid and something completely silly. And it's really just kind of pointing out the absurdity of war just as an idea, and saying war is completely ridiculous. And then there's some even more subtle stuff. You know, remember, this movie was made in the middle of the Iraq War. And at the end, when they show the sand throwing witch, you know, tossing sand into the air, I guess Miike directed the actress to throw it in the geographical direction of where Iraq was. So, you know, smart filmmaker. and we're gonna plow through some trivia. And I'm not sure if we'll have time for questions, but I think let's get through this stuff. Kevin, take it away with some trivia here.
Yeah, let's go through some of this stuff pretty quick, just in terms of the production. It was a very long shoot, as we talked about, by Miike standards, and there was a lot of mix of practical effects and CGI, which was not the most common at the time that this was made. I say 170 different types of yokai, just because I went through kind of like counting them, but there's definitely seems like there were more than that, if you consider that there were 3,000 extras. You got a couple of yokai scholars, like Matt Alt and Hiroko Yoda, that were actually on set and got to put on some yokai costumes for the piece as well. And then one of the sets burned down during production, which set things back a little bit. You can see some of the set designs. They're not super intricate, but they're definitely for constructing for a single movie. Impressive, and you can sort of see some of the design work that went into to each one of these.
And some more interesting bits for Miike fans. At times, he would actually direct the movie wearing the mask from his tokusatsu hero, Zebra Man. He did two kind of tokusatsu hero movies, Zebra Man 1 and 2. They're really good. The movie even features a cameo from the crab alien creature from Zebra Man. In Zebra Man, he was played by Akira Emoto, who we see in here, and Yuki from Space Godzilla. Then we have some other things. Miike regular Shohei Uno has a cameo as the Monkey King, who's a mythological character in Chinese lore. Tadashi travels to the real-life Mizuki Museum that we mentioned earlier, and all along that street in Japan, there are actual sculptures of his Kitaro characters. And another Kitaro reference is when the cloth yokai is trying to get away from a fight, the kappa says, you're always so brave in the Kitaro stories. The gigantic Yamatsumono creature, which is like the big kaiju in the movie, is mistaken for Gamera at one point. And also Miyuki Miyabe, who was on the consulting team, and she wrote Pyrokinesis, which was Kaneko made a movie about that. She played the teacher at the beginning of the movie. And then we have some concept art from all four of the main yokai artists, so we're going to take a look at that.
Yeah, they kind of they split up the art a bit between them. So sort of our main characters were designed by Junya Inoue, who would be best known for his manga series Bitum, which had an anime adaptation. Yasushi Nirasawa, who is a fantastic creature designer, kind of did the all of the Yamatsumono type of stuff, and you can see that his original designs for Agi and Kato were different from what wound up in the final designs. And yes, there's a lot of chainsaws, and this is a year after he did Gigan for Final Wars. I think there might have been a little bit of overlap between the two of them. Takayuki Takeya, who I think people in this crowd would probably know for Shin Godzilla, but also has done a lot of fantastic creature designs. Did a handful of the yokai in this, and you can really see his hand and a few of the ways that the monsters look. And Tomo Hyakutake, who I think is mostly a figure like toy designer, but did a handful of the designs, including the weird human-faced dog and the giant flying creature that we get towards the climax of the film. So there was a novelization that was made concurrently with the movie by Aramata, but also Mizuki himself did a manga adaptation that Aramata wrote, and it's a little bit different. It's funny because usually you'd think in the manga they would go bigger, but the manga is a little bit of a smaller scale compared to the compared to the movie. So there's some little changes here and there. For one thing, Kato and Agi sort of ride around in this weird looking like helicopter thing. Sune Kosuri can talk, and Agi really reminds me of Neko Musume from the Kitaro manga.
So the movie came out. It was actually a big hit at the box office. However, there wasn't much merchandise, but obviously, you know, they kept on going. They made Gamera the Brave after this, and the success of this movie, Miike signed on to do a Daimajin reboot, but then Gamera the Brave happened, and that just fell apart, and they eventually did the TV show. It's too bad the Miike version never got made. You know, I think there were ideas. You know, they said they wanted this to be like their Harry Potter or Lord of the Rings. So any sequels or anything all got scrapped. So thanks, Gamera. But however, there was kind of a little boom. There was a theme park attraction. And then the late 2000s did have a little yokai boom. And Kevin has a list of titles here.
Yeah, I mean, you could point to some of the earlier things like Sakuya is kind of paving the way as well, but this was a huge hit in a way that, you know, the Kibakichi wasn't. And after this, you started getting, you know, you got your actual live action Kitaro movies, and you got things like Cat Eye Boy and Dororo and Yokai Ningen Bem, as well as anime movies like Letter to Momo and Summer Days with Ku. So you started just seeing like yokai flooding the market all of a sudden in the wake of this movie, and that's a nice impact, even if this franchise wasn't able to continue.
Yeah. So yeah, that's the Great Yokai War. I mean, I rewatched it for this, and it's become one of my favorite Miike films. I'm a big fan of that director, and it kind of gets better every time I watch it. Really, I give it like 4.5 out of 5.
Yep, that's the same place that I'm at. I think that it's one of the movies that, you know, there's occasional flaws here and there. You know, all of the special effects aren't necessarily going to hold up, but there's a whole lot to admire in it, and especially as we were talking about, there's so much going on with the thematics, and then you appreciate all of the work that went into all of the costumes and designs. And if you're a yokai geek, you can just go through and be like, oh, I recognize that guy. Oh, that they worked this guy in, and it's a lot of fun.
Yeah. So check it out. The DVD I think is still out there. I hope so, but hopefully it'll get a Blu-ray release here someday. But
Justin says in the comments that there's a DVD new on Right Stuff for like $2. So yeah, it's not streaming anywhere. So if you're trying to do that, that's unfortunate. Well, I think we might be at about time. I don't know what.
We're at 53 minutes, so we use 3 minutes of overlap time. So let's get out of here.
All right, but thanks everybody.
Thank you, Kyle, for having us involved. Thank you for doing this. This is going to be a great event. So stick around, people. There's more stuff going on.
I've got a panel later.
Yes. All right.
All right.
Bye.
See ya.